Christian Life Coaching by Jimmy and Melissa Thrasher. I'm Melissa. Jimmy and I are ordained ministers, and we speak to the spiritual side of mankind. We offer hope and encouragement in Christ found in His holy word, and we share our personal testimonies of the wonderful things God has done in our lives. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Christian Life Coaching by Jimmy and Melissa Thrasher. You can also find us on Buzzsprout and all of the major digital podcast providers. Today's podcast is entitled Steifon Passmore, I Have More to Say. Jimmy and I will be talking with Steifon, better known in the radio world as Fletcher Brown, whom everyone lovingly refers to as Fletch. You will hear us refer to him today as both Steifon and Fletch. I mean, it's just hard not to say Fletch. Today, Fletch will be sharing with us what he experienced during his recent battle with cancer and his recent healing. Before we move into today's message, I would like to ask you to do something simple to help our ministry grow. If our ministry speaks into your life with hope and encouragement, Jimmy and I would like to ask you to please download this podcast and forward it to a friend you think would be encouraged by this message. Downloading our podcast not only helps us to speak hope and encouragement into Christ into more people's lives, it also provides a metric whereby, as our downloads continue to grow, they also reach certain benchmarks where more opportunities are afforded to us to grow our ministry. So please reach over and tap that download button and forward this message to a friend or family member you know that could use some hope and encouragement in Christ. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for doing so and helping us to grow our ministry. Steifon Passmore, the operations manager for Big River Broadcasting and the program director and afternoon drive personality for WXFL-FM, working on air under the moniker M. Fletcher Brown. Moving to Florence in 1992, he is a graduate of the University of North Alabama with a degree in theater and broadcasting. He has raised 3 children and has recently welcomed his first grandchild. He has over 30 years of experience performing live in semi-professional, local community, or educational theater productions, television, and independent films. In his 26 years in radio, he has been recognized numerous times by industry organizations like the Alabama Broadcasters Association, the Academy of Country Music, and the Country Music Association, as well as being annually recognized by Radio Inc. magazine in their top PDS and best PDS in country list. Weekly, he can be seen as the host of the locally produced live music program Muscle Shoals to Music Row Live on Alabama Public Television. Steifon has partnered with our Christian Life Coaching Ministry by producing the podcast episodes you listen to on our show, which will also include this episode. Jimmy, share with our listeners how we met Fletch and a little about that day.
In my line of work, I meet new people almost every day. Some people I meet, it's just a one-time thing encountered in that day's business functions. Some people I meet turn into business acquaintances whom I continue to do business with, talking randomly every so often. But then there are those rare few that you encounter every so often in life who becomes close friends who literally change your life for the better. And that is who Fletcher is to us. We met Fletch in 2022 at CRS in Nashville. Our 501c3 ministry, Silent Witness, had a booth set up, and we were promoting our current project that year, Live. Suicide prevention is something that Fletch believes in, so he stopped by our booth to visit with us, and it was during that conversation a friendship and common ground was found to work together. Out of everything we do, our music, the work we do with Silent Witness Incorporated, and everything we do in our Christian Life Coaching Ministry, it was this podcast show that struck a chord with the 3 of us. Fletch said he would be happy to be involved in our podcast show, and soon thereafter he began producing these podcast shows for us, which has just raised our work to a whole new level, and we're so very thankful for everything Fletch does to help us grow in our work.
Jimmy, I couldn't agree more that Fletch had a great impact on our lives and has been instrumental in helping us grow our Christian Life Coaching podcast. Fletch, hi, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you both so much.
Fletch, when I stop to think that we've only known each other since February of 2022, which at this point is just 1 year and 3 months, when I think of everything that has transpired in that year and 3 months, it is simply astounding. In this small space of time, the 3 of us met, you found out that you had had cancer, you went through the treatment process, God healed you, and you're doing fantastic. You have now produced 4 of our most recent podcast episodes, and our show has now reached into 23 countries on 6 continents and in 238 cities. I mean, wow, that's a lot, and that is what we are here to talk about today.
Absolutely, Melissa. And I don't typically, as much as you might expect a radio guy to, don't like talking about myself, but the opportunity to come on this show and talk to both you and Jimmy about the last year of my life and this journey and how you and everybody else in the world around me has fit into that journey, I couldn't say no.
Before we dive dive into the heart of today's episode, we need to lay the groundwork of the More to Say part of the work. Jimmy, tell us what More to Say is and how it fits into our music business, our 501c3 ministry, and our Christian life coaching ministry.
Yes, I had a loss in my life and was just on the other side of the grieving process when God brought some fellow songwriters into my life who had also suffered their own losses. As we got to know each other better and learn one another's stories, we found that though our stories were different, we all dealt with very similar challenges as we went through the grieving process and embraced our new lives. The three of us wrote a song together, More to Say, which led to us writing a play with the same title and has now become the 2023-2024 project for Silent Witness Incorporated. The goal of our More to Say work is to allow space where not only we can share our experiences that led to this work, but also allow space for others to share their experiences of loss, survival, and then realizing they have more good to do in this world, that they have more to say. Today, Fletch will be sharing about his experience of surviving cancer and realizing that he has so much more to say.
Thank you for laying the groundwork for today's episode, which brings us to hearing Fletch's story, which is nothing short of miraculous. Fletch, did you know that you had cancer when you met us that day at CRS in Nashville?
No, actually, I didn't. I didn't find out that I had cancer until almost 2 full months later. I mean, there's an element of providence for the people that entered my life and whose space I entered into just right before that happened.
It's humbling to know that was going on and that God brought you into our lives at CRS. Before we move on to the next part of today's message, I would like to ask you to do something very simple to help our ministry grow. If our ministry speaks into your life with hope and encouragement, Jimmy and I want to ask you to please go to our Facebook page, Christian Life Coaching by Jimmy and Melissa Thrasher. Hit that like button and then share our page with all of your friends. This will help us reach more people with our podcast and provide a metric whereby, as our followers continue to grow, certain benchmarks will allow us more opportunities to grow our ministry and reach even more people with hope and encouragement in Christ. So please head over to our Facebook page, Christian Life Coaching by Jimmy and Melissa Thrasher, and hit that like button, and then share our page with your friends. This will help us out, and we are so very thankful for you and all your help. Fletch, share with us about the time span from where you were diagnosed with cancer and what transpired from then until you got the news you were cancer-free and you had been healed.
I found out on April 7th that I had an unusual cancer, and they didn't really know what it was until they'd gotten deeper pathology results. And it turned out that it was called synovial sarcoma, which was relatively rare. And it wasn't a matter of weeks or months, but literally days from being diagnosed with cancer to seeing an oncologist and having a treatment plan already in place. Now, they had initially misdiagnosed me, but they sent me to MD Anderson in Houston, and that's like the #1 cancer treatment center in the world. So they sent me there, and MD Anderson found the correct diagnosis. And next thing I know, I'm looking at the next several months with a regimen for chemotherapy and then radiation treatments, and then eventually surgery to have the tumor removed from my left shoulder. That's where it was growing.
So I'm staring down this long hallway of time that isn't really very long at all. I mean, it was like 8 months from beginning to end, but at the beginning of that, it just felt like this forever road that I was about to start walking down. But it was so amazing. All of the things that just happened to me along that road that involved other people and what some might consider just happenstance. But
I have a hard time saying that's just chance. That got me through that whole period, that 8-month process, all the way to the end when I'm laying in the hospital, literally having surgery on my 50th birthday. I turned 50 years old. I'm unconscious in a Houston hospital having this cancerous tumor removed from my arm. And I was there with my son. And I woke up in the hospital and I'm looking at him and I'm like, I guess this is it. I guess this means this is over now. And sitting there, taking the last 8 months of my life at that point in and thinking about everything that had happened and everybody that had come to my aid, it was almost overwhelming to think about.
What an incredible, amazing, true story. I think one of the most amazing gifts God gives us in this life is the gift of a mother. Fletch, share with the listening audience about how you realized in your journey that if this had been your mother facing this, she would have fallen back in her faith in God, and how for you, this experience was a journey through yourself.
Well, I often tell people that have known me for years, I say, if you've never met my parents, my father is a devout atheist. My mother, however, is a deeply Christian woman. People who've known me for 20, 30 years say, oh, you make a lot more sense now. But that notwithstanding, the fact is that my mother approaches everything in life from the perspective of her faith and her relationship with God. And when I was diagnosed with cancer, that's immediately what she did. And I know that had this been her journey, which my mother, she's in her mid-80s and her health isn't the greatest. She's nearly completely blind and almost completely deaf. And for my mother, the kind of woman that she is, I know that that's a terrible place to be. But even now in her life, she stays firmly rooted in her Christian faith and with her church group and the support system that she finds there. And that group helped take care of her as she worried over me over the last year of my life. For me, people misunderstand how I think often, and I understand that. I don't always talk about my perceptions of faith and relationships with God. I don't often talk about those things, but people misunderstand that about me quite often, probably because I don't talk about it more. But the fact of the matter is I did take great comfort in my mother and in her expression of faith. I did take great comfort in the expressions of faith from my aunts, her sisters, my cousins, my uncle, who called me regularly and kept up with me and took care of me emotionally and spiritually. That the friends like you and Jimmy who regularly prayed for me and often with me, good people who shared their faith with me and made me a part of their faith, because that's the one thing that I think about when I think about my mother is how strong she is in her faith and how much that means to her. So when people of faith share their faith with me and they bring me in and they make me a part of that, I feel closer to my mother. And like you said, there's no greater gift. Nothing in the world makes me feel safer than my mother. Nothing in the world makes me feel more cared for and more at ease than the idea of my mother. And I can't think of my mother without thinking of faith. So it was, for me, the journey that I went through trying to overcome cancer, trying to heal and get better. It wasn't just about understanding the disease for me. In order to be able, for me, to be able to be mentally and emotionally stable and calm enough to try and process what was happening to me, I needed that bedrock. I needed that balancing force, that feeling of my mother and the strength in her faith to carry me where I needed to be mentally to get where I needed to go. That was amazingly important for me all through my journey.
Fletch, I'm reminded of our conversations about your dog Anubis and how he was a stabilizing source during your journey through all the treatments in your journey to healing. Every time I think about those conversations, I think about my dog, Brownie, who I got in the first grade, and she lived 2 years after I graduated. I literally grew up with her, and that constant companionship and friendship is something I am so thankful for even now. Share with the audience what a blessing Anubis was to you during your journey through being healed from cancer.
It's really emotional for me to talk about my dog because of exactly when he came into my life. It was shortly after I'd met you at CRS in February. A few weeks later, I was at home. It was March. And there was a stray dog that had been roaming around the complex for a day or two. And I didn't realize that he didn't belong to someone in the complex. My neighbors, I thought he belonged to them. They were out. What I found out was they were looking for his family. Well, I opened my apartment door that particular day from inside, and this dog was there and just came running into my home. Didn't stop, just ran right past me and jumped on my couch like, oh, I live here now. And I'm like, no, I don't know you. What are you doing in my house? And but I'm an animal lover. I mean, I didn't like shoo him or anything. I just realized fairly quickly that he was a stray. So without going too in depth with it, I spent the next 2 weeks trying to find his family, working with the local shelter. And the more time that I spent with him, the more I kind of got attached to the idea of him. He was so friendly and just so nice and had zero fear of people and just was excited to see anybody. I told the shelter, I said, well, if we can't find his family, then I want to foster him and maybe adopt him. So I did that. And so before I ever found out I had cancer, which was almost a month later, because I found out on April 7th and he came into my life in mid-March, almost a full month before I got the worst news of my life medically. Here is this amazing animal that came into my life around the time that I was thinking I might have room in my heart for another pet, because I did. I had a cat that I had had for about 18 years, and she died about 10 years ago when my kids were little. And my people had asked, my oldest daughter works for the animal shelter, and she was like, Daddy, don't you want another dog? Don't you want another cat? And I was like, no, honey, I don't really have room in my heart yet for another animal, but I will, but I'd been thinking about it. She had been working on me, and I had been thinking about it. And then here Anubis just showed up in my life a month almost before I got the worst news of my life. I can't look at that and say that was just coincidence. Even if it was just coincidence, it didn't feel like coincidence. That dog, over the course of the next 3 to 4 months, as I started chemotherapy and whatnot, as I was learning to live with this new reality, that dog was my rock. That dog became the one thing that I could focus on, training him and building a relationship with him, because it was just he and I together in the apartment. All my children are adults. They don't live with me anymore. It was just me and the dog. And, getting him up and taking him out and walking him, making sure he gets exercise. He's just a puppy. He's barely 2 years old now. Getting him situated into my life and getting he and I, established saved me. It saved my sanity. It absolutely did. And I often still now, all this time later, I still look at him sometime like, did you know you were supposed to come here? How did that work? Did you just know? I don't really have an explanation for it, but I love him, and I'm happy that he's still with me.
Fletch, as we sat around the break room table one Saturday morning talking about today's episode, one thing I remember you talking about was the miracle of other people and how your friend's mother's gift of the pet deposit spoke to your heart.
Anubis came to me. I live in an apartment complex, and he came to me at the exact wrong time because I hadn't paid the pet deposit for my apartment, and it was a pretty substantial amount of money. It's about $700. And so I was looking at this dog, and I'm like, I can't keep you because I haven't paid the pet deposit, and they'll throw me out. Well, a dear friend of mine named Lucy, who I had called, remember I'd said that we'd spend a couple of weeks trying to find his family and working with the shelter. Well, I'd asked Lucy and her husband to take the dog and get him to the shelter for me, hang on to him or get him to the shelter if they couldn't hang on to him. And over the course of the day or so that they had him, her mother met Anubis and decided that dog belonged to me, that I needed that dog. Now, I'd never met her mother, but maybe once at their wedding, I think. The woman didn't know me from Adam. And Lucy calls me and she says, my mother's decided that that's your dog and you have to keep it. And I'm like, well, I haven't paid the pet deposit. That's not going to happen. And she's like, oh no, my mom's going to pay the pet deposit. And I said, no, I can't let her do that. That's a lot of money. And she said, no, you don't understand my mom. You just need to let this happen. It's going to happen. And sure enough, her mother came to the apartment complex like the next day and gave them $700 for my pet deposit so that I could keep this animal. That's not random. That's just not something that I look at as people don't just do that, do they? I mean, in what universe does that just happen? It didn't make any sense to me. I mean, I didn't fight it, but at the same time, I'm just like, this doesn't feel real. This doesn't feel normal. This feels like there's something else at work here Like, I'm just supposed to have this, and I guess she knows this. And you got to remember, this was all before I knew that I had cancer growing in my arm. These things were just happening for reasons that I couldn't explain. And I mean, I'm not even trying to explain it now. It's just, it feels like, yeah, that was supposed to happen. That was someone's will being worked in my life.
Fletch, I remember you talking about how your friend's mom was the forerunner of the kindness you would experience from other people. Share that experience with us.
I remember that the first thing that happened was my job, the people that I work with, who I've worked with for 26 years now. My boss came to me and was like, whatever you need, we're going to make sure that that happens. And for the duration of my treatment, they flew me to Houston and made sure that I had accommodations. The next thing that happened was an outpouring from the country music community in Nashville that I had been working with for 20 years at this point as a programmer. The friends that I had made, the people in the community who were like the record promoters that called me on a weekly basis. And I'd forged these relationships with these folks over the course of 2 decades. But you think of, business relationships as just that. They're business relationships, they're working relationships. You don't always think about the human side of any relationship, really. And it just never occurred to me. And then all of these people from Nashville who have known me for 20 years, they start to give. A woman I work with named Hallie, who is one of my best friends in the world, and incidentally my boss at the same time, she insisted that I let her create a GoFundMe because she says, you're dealing with cancer and that's going to be very expensive. And you're going to need a GoFundMe. You're going to need that help. And my pride at first was like, I resisted, very resistant. And eventually she wore me down and I said, all right, fine. You set it up and you manage it. And then, yes, okay, that'll do. Well, she created the GoFundMe and that thing funded in less than a week. I couldn't believe it. None of it made any sense. And while I was going through my cancer journey, I had colleagues in the radio industry who were going through their own cancer journeys. My dear, dear friend, Don Brake, who I'd known for 20 years. And he had been diagnosed with a different type of cancer, an abdominal cancer, like about a year before I got mine, maybe 7 months. And he and I would talk and we would joke with one another while keeping each other's spirits up, going, hey man, in a couple of months, we're going to both be on the other side of this. We're going to be feeling better. And years down the road, we're going to be sitting at CRS and we're going to look at each other and be like, hey, remember that time we had cancer? And we're going to laugh about it. And then in October, while I was in Houston for radiation, right around Halloween, Don died. He passed away. His cancer took him. And I remember speaking with his wife America, and they'd had a little girl some years before. She was, Naomi's maybe 5 years old, and she told me that Dawn passed away on her birthday in her arms. And I remember sitting on the floor of the apartment that I was living in Houston, listening to her and thinking about all of the kindness and everything that everybody had done for me and all of the things that I'm like, I don't deserve this. Why is Dawn gone and I'm here? And this is what's in my head. And the whole time America is talking about how she's sad. She's lost her husband and her best friend, but she's like, this isn't going to define my life. She said my birthday is not going to be a sad day. She said, my birthday will be the day that I celebrate, being born myself and the 10 years of life that I had with my best friend. And everything about what she said just filled me with so much light because I'm listening to her talk about how she chooses to live in her faith and carry the memory of Dawn with her going forward. And I think about her strength. And I think about the unmitigated kindness of people, and in many cases, strangers who gave to me over the course of the last, year almost at that point. And I'm sitting on the floor of that apartment and I'm listening to America talk about joy instead of sadness and grief. And it hit me, a thought occurred to me. I realized, oh, this is what grace feels like. Because grace is a word that, we know the definition of grace. We use it all the time. The definition of grace, and I looked it up because I wanted to make sure I got it right. In the Christian belief, the free and unmerited favor of God as manifested in the salvation of sinners and the bestowal of blessings. That's the textbook, that's the dictionary definition of grace. And I had a moment when I realized that's what that feels like. This is what that is. We know the word, but we don't ever really give it much consideration, I don't think. And it all came rushing in a moment. And I mean, all I could really do was just sit there and cry on the phone with America. But I was crying less about the loss of her husband and one of my dear friends, and more just about, I guess, just the joy of grace, of feeling strength and beauty in a terrible, terrible moment.
Wow, what an impact of kindness and grace. We should all strive to show more kindness and grace. Before we move to the final part of today's message, I would like to ask you to do something very simple to help our ministry grow. If our ministry speaks into your life with hope and encouragement, Jimmy and I want to ask you to please go to our Instagram page, Christian Life Coach J_M Thrasher. Hit that follow button and then share our page with all of your friends. This will help us to reach more people with our podcast and provide a metric whereby, as our followers continue to grow, certain benchmarks will allow us more opportunities to grow our ministry and reach even more people with the hope and encouragement in Christ. So please head over to our Instagram page, Christian Life Coach J_M Thrasher, and hit that follow button, and then share our page with all of your friends. This will help us out, and we are so very thankful for all your help. Fletch, share with us about that day, the day when the diagnosis came.
I had been to the hospital to have the biopsy done a few days before, and I had told myself in those days leading up that it was probably nothing. Everybody felt like it was nothing. My other doctors were like, this is nothing. It's probably just this other thing. But we're doing a biopsy just to be certain. And the day I got that call, it was a Thursday. It was April 7th. And I'm standing behind my desk at work, and the surgeon who did the biopsy is on the phone and says, Mr. Passmore, you have an unusual kind of cancer. And I'm like, well, what do you mean unusual? And he said, we don't really have a designation for it. But don't worry, we've got you set up with an oncologist. You'll be getting a call from their office soon. And at that moment, it was kind of like tunnel vision. I just, everything I did just was kind of going through the motions. I hung up my phone. I picked up my keys. I walked to my car. I told my office that I was leaving for lunch. I didn't say anything to anybody on the way out the door. I got into my car and I called my best friend, who was a man named Wes. And I said, hey, meet me at my apartment. I have something I need to talk to you about. And my best friend, he's also my insurance agent. And so I get to my apartment and Wes is already there. And he's like, what's up, man? He's probably thinking that we're just going to hang out for lunch. And I tell him, well, I just found out that I have cancer. And the shock on his face was basically everything that I was feeling. From that moment, I needed my best friend. I needed him to kind of help me carry that burden, if that makes sense. I needed to help. I needed someone that I knew, that I trusted, that I cared about, and that cared about me to kind of like, all right, I'm going to hold on to me. I need you to hold me up. And it's good that, you are just as shaken as I am, because I've got to now call my parents and tell them. I have to call my mother and tell my mother, who is, aging and not in the greatest health herself. I've got to tell her that I've been given this news. And that's not going to be easy to do, because I know my mother. And my mother is not, she's more than just a worrier. My mother is a helper. My mother is going to want to immediately get up, get in a car, and come here to where I am. And she's not going to be able to do that. So from the moment that I was told that I had cancer, all I could think about were the other people in my life. My mom and my dad, my kids, my best friends. How was I going to be able to tell them this and myself be able to kind of help them deal with what I ultimately have to deal with? I don't really know any other way to explain that other than I was more worried about the other people in my circle than I was myself, at least in that moment. I don't think I had actually processed that yet as far as how cancer related to me. But that was the day that I learned that I had cancer. My greatest fear was having to call and tell my mother.
Fletch, share with us how you had to learn to accept the love and kindness from others, the process of sowing and reaping, and the literal wave of love you experienced.
Well, I'd mentioned like my coworkers, like my bosses, who were amazing. I don't believe I would have gotten through the last year without the people that I work for, taking care of like my travel and accommodations back and forth to Houston, and Hallie setting up that GoFundMe. But beyond that, the GoFundMe is a perfect example because it's like the number of people that contributed to that thing, the amounts that were contributed to that thing. It absolutely unequivocally saved my life in more than beyond just the medicine. It took concern and worry off of me. When you're dealing with something like sickness, like disease, there's more than just the disease itself to be concerned and worry about. There's, how am I going to pay for the medical bills? Am I worried about losing time from work? All of these other things. There are other things because life continues. You have to deal with life while dealing with that. Those things compound. The people in my life, the people that came through for me, my coworkers, my friends, they took that concern away. All I had to focus on was healing. That was the most amazing thing. The willingness of so many people to check on me, to bring me things, to bring me food. I don't think I cooked a meal for almost a year while I was going through that. I had friends that were just bringing me meals like on rotation. I had prayer groups that were people would tell me all the time how I was on their prayer list at their church. So many people, like total strangers, caring about me. And to me, that was mind-blowing. It never occurred to me that was even possible for something like that. The number of people that took time out of their day just to call me and check on me, like my good friends like Carrie Gilbert, who is a local musician who also is struggling with his own cancer journey, still right now actively, found time to call me brother and worry over me and pray over me. Marty Rabin of the legendary country band Shenandoah called me to share with me his cancer story from some years ago and tell me, he's like, brother, he's like, you're gonna have moments that they're scary, they're gonna be bad, and tell me that he was there. And these things happen. I'm like, Marty didn't have to call me. Carrie didn't have to. Nobody had to do any of the things that they did, but they did. They did for me because I mattered to them. And that is one of the greatest things that you can do for another person ever, is just to let them know that they matter to you. You would be shocked if you haven't thought about it, just how far that simple thing can go in some person's life.
Fletch, I remember after I lost my late wife, I had to sell everything she and I had to pay off her medical bills. I had to move in with my mom and dad for a year while I paid those bills off. After paying those bills off, the first thing for me was to build a new home for myself. The need to get it done was tremendous, but I was dealing with grief at the time, and the wherewithal to build a new home, it was just not within me. It was during that time that the two men I worked for, they came in and did something astounding. They took it upon themselves the job of general contractor and built my new home, and on many days, they even helped build it with their own hands. It was only during the building process that God healed me from the depression part of the grieving process. When you experience such an act of caring and love, it is humbling beyond belief. You experienced something very similar to what I experienced. Please share with us how people that love you began planning on how you would get through to healing when you had no idea yourself.
That is very difficult for me. If there's one aspect of my personality that I wish I could just flip a switch and change, it's my pride. And the idea that I have to do that thing on my own. It's not that I won't accept help. It's just that I'm reticent to accept help. I don't often ask for help. and I don't look for it, and I don't expect it, and I should. And I think it comes from a place, honestly, I think it comes from a place where people often disappoint me. I've told my mother in our many conversations over the course of my life about my relationship with God and church. And I said, Mom, the thing with me is I am so often disappointed with people that I just kind of put this space between me and them, and I don't expect anything from people. That's the best way that I know to not just hate everybody. It's like, if I don't expect anything from people, then I'm not going to be mad at them because I don't expect anything of them. And that's how I've lived my life for the longest time, not really expecting anything. I don't expect kindness. I know that kindness is real and it exists, and I try to be kind, but I don't expect it. And this last year forced me into a position where I had to acknowledge that the world isn't the terrible, terrible place that I thought it was. I had a dear friend of mine, their mother, a woman who has taken care of me for a very long time. She told me, and she was in my face, basically scolding me like a mother would, because I was resistant to help. And she looked at me and she said, when someone wants to help you, let them. Just let them. She says, you don't realize it, but they need that too. They want to help you. Let them. And I had to embrace that. And I was glad that she said that. It meant a lot, and from that moment, I was able to just sort of breathe and, just kind of, like you say, accept the love and kindness from other people. And when I did that, the bounty of that, it was amazing. It just washed over me. And I felt amazing. I felt loved. There is no greater feeling than feeling loved. And I look around the world sometimes, the close world, the world that I walk in every day, and I look at people and I see people sometimes that I think that person doesn't feel loved. And I wish I could make that person feel love. I wish that there was a way that I could make that person feel what I think they're missing so that their life improves, even if just for a day.
Fletch, this brings us to our next question. This past year, your experience, it has all led to your realization that you have more to say. And this podcast is but the first step for you finding that voice. Share with us your desire to now serve God in His perfect will for you as you begin a new journey of helping others, and how you are kind of awaiting that next step that God has for you.
Well, Jimmy, honestly, the beginning of this thought began when I was in the hospital. I had a moment that was the scariest moment during my cancer treatment, when I had developed a blood clot in my neck. And I had something called superior vena cava syndrome, and I almost died. My best friend had to take me to the emergency room at like 5 o'clock in the morning. My whole head and neck had swollen up, and I'm laying in the hospital, and the doctors are telling me this, like, yes, you have to have emergency surgery. And they couldn't intubate me, normally. So they had to like go in through my nose. It was a really, really terrible process because my throat had almost completely closed up. I was in really bad shape. I woke up a day later in the ICU. I'd been in the ICU for like 5 days, all told. But I woke up a day after in the ICU, having lost a full day and didn't realize it. And when I woke up, my ex-girlfriend and her mother were in the room with me. Another friend and her mother were in the room with me. Before long that day, my whole family showed up. My mother, my father, my sisters, my nephew, and my great niece showed up. And all of these people were in my room with me in that first day that I was awake after going through that ordeal. Now, the whole time that I was in ICU, I noticed that there were people. There was an elderly gentleman in the room next door, and I only saw one person ever come or go from his room. And I didn't know if that was maybe a daughter or, maybe his wife. I didn't know who. I mean, he was a much, much older man, and she was an older woman, but I wouldn't have been able to accurately gauge their ages. I just know that she was the only one that I saw. And I remembered thinking, while I was laying in ICU, I've had all of these visitors, from my family to dear close friends, that were just there checking on me over the course of 5 days. And I remembered laying there thinking, there are people up here who don't have anybody. There are people up here who, unlike me, didn't have anybody at all that came to visit them. Or maybe they were like that elderly gentleman next door, only had the one person. But I'm like, there are people that they don't have any family left or friends or anybody. This is the scariest moment of their life, and there's nobody here with them but the hospital staff. And I remembered asking one of the nurses, I was like, do you guys have a program or something where people can volunteer to come in and like sit with patients and maybe read to them or just, I don't know, talk to them and just be human with them in a moment? The scariest moment of your life, you shouldn't feel alone. And that was where the beginning of that thought came from that you mentioned. The idea that I'm going to survive this, and I'm going to survive this because I have really talented doctors and I am covered in love and faith, and I have all of these things going for me, but there are people that don't have even half of what I'm working with, and those people need. So when you had asked me some time ago, what was my takeaway from all of this? What was my takeaway? And people have asked me, said, does life feel sweeter now? Do you feel like there are things that you need to accomplish, that will make life richer for you? I said, no, I have this overwhelming need to help people. I feel like I was given all of this that arguably I didn't deserve, but that's neither here nor there. I'm here. I survived, and I had all of these gifts, and I have to put that back. I have to go into the world and do for other people. I have to serve. And that's what I'm doing now with my life, is looking for opportunities to work with other people, to serve other people's needs, people who need to just be that person for them in whatever capacity that they need it. That's what I feel like I'm called to do now. Is like, I've always been someone who wanted to go and do work. I'd rather go to a poor country and build a school or dig a well than just throw money at a problem. That's just who I am. But now more than ever, I just have this burning desire to be of service and to just help people.
God has great plans for you, Fletch. We now come to the end of this podcast. If you want to connect with us, please go to our Facebook page, Christian Life Coaching by Jimmy and Melissa Thrasher. Please like, share, or send comments or questions. Also, please visit our evangelism and missions ministry, Silent Witness Inc., at silentwitnessinc.org to find out what we are doing in evangelism and missions. If you are a business or corporate owner and would like to partner with our podcast show, please contact us to discuss how we can further our callings together. If you visited Silent Witness Inc. and would like to participate in that work, please consider giving at silentwitnessinc.org. We hope you look to God and His Word for the answers to all of your needs and concerns. And until next time, be sure to be good to yourself and to those around you.